Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 21st of June of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss the situation in Ukraine. Today the Ukrainian intelligence services provided us very interesting numbers, and according to them the Russians have become much more stronger than before the special military operation. Furthermore, during this video we're going to discuss the situation on the ground, because according to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly in the South Donetsk direction. Also, we are going to talk about the situation in Iran. According to information we have, the United States of America are about to launch their special operation with the purpose to destroy completely the Iranian nuclear enrichment plants. So let's start from the beginning and let's start in details. First, let's talk about this area of the special military operation and about the numbers that were provided by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian intelligence services reported that Russia has accumulated more than 1,950 strategic missiles of various types, including cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and Kinzhal missiles. As of June 15, Russia's main missile stockpiles include up to 500 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, up to 300 Iskander-K cruise missiles, furthermore, up to 260 Ha-101 cruise missiles, which are launched by Tu-95 and Tu-160. Furthermore, the Russians managed to accumulate 280 Ha-22 and Ha-32 cruise missiles from Tu-22. More than 400 Caliber cruise missiles the Russians managed to accumulate, and the most important, up to 150 hypersonic missiles by the name of Kinzhal. So as you can see, according to these numbers, currently the Russians are much more stronger in comparison with the situation before the beginning of the special military operation. And I would like to remind you that the Western analytics and Western sources reported that in 2022, at the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians had missiles just for 3 days of war. But 3 years of war has been passed, and the Russians continue accumulation of their missile process. Another important information was provided by the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. He stated that about 800,000 Russian troops are participating in the war, 200 attacks per day on the front. 695,000 Russian troops are in Ukraine, plus the Kursk-Belgorod directions, where they are opposite Kharkiv and opposite Sumy. There are also about 52,000 from the Sumy direction. The total number of attacks per day is up to 200 along the entire front line. So Zelensky is trying to tell us that the Russian army is very strong right now, and this is the main reason why he asked the European countries and his allies to allocate 0.25% of GDP to increase weapons production. Obviously, we see that Ukraine suffers lacks of arms and weapons because the United States of America currently is transferring everything they have in the direction of Middle East, because very powerful war is going to start here right now. We see just the real pre-war situation, but most likely something big is going to happen. Let's continue with the area of the special military operation. Today we already discussed the situation in the area of the city by the name of Kremenchuk. According to information we have, the Russians launched massive missile strike and drone strike in this area. Lots of explosions were recorded by the Ukrainian sources. The Ukrainians are saying that at least 50 explosions were heard in the city. The Russians managed to destroy this oil refinery completely. And during the day we continue receiving additional updates about the situation. And the most important, we got this picture. This is the picture that shows the fire anomalies. As you can see, almost the entire territory of the Kremenchuk oil refinery is covered with fire, which means that the Russians managed to deal significant damage. Telling the truth, we believe that this oil refinery was destroyed by the Russians completely, and probably tons of fuel the Ukrainians are not going to receive along the line of combat contact, which obviously will give significant superiority for the armored force of the Russian Federation in the very near future. Furthermore, according to information we have and according to this picture, as you can see, the Russians attacked not just the city of Kremenchuk and Kremenchuk oil refinery, the Russians also attacked the city of Odessa, and as a result of this attack, the Russians managed to deal significant damage as well. According to information we have, the Russians were attacking this airfield. This is another map, another picture with fire anomalies. Most likely the Russians managed to destroy some warehouses or ammo depots. Maybe the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian air defense system. Another important piece of news from the entire Ukraine, from let's say the global scope, is that the Russians continue very interesting military exercises. According to information we have, probably since the 2024, the Russians almost every single day take additional exercises for river crossing. So maybe the Russians are trying to keep the Ukrainians in stress, always in stress, to show them that the Russians have enough of weapons, enough of equipment to cross the river of Dnipro and to restore control over the northern part of the Kherson region. So this is something like most likely is a kind of media attack against the Ukrainians, forcing them to keep as many as possible soldiers in this area. Obviously, this allows the Russians to improve their positions along the line of combat contact, let's say somewhere in the vicinity of Gulyaypole or in the vicinity of the city of Pokrovsk. Now let's talk about the changes on the ground. And first let's talk about the Dnipropetrovsk direction and the Gulyaypole area. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly in the southern part of the village of Malinovka. Just yesterday, pro-Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how Russians, according to the author of this video, established complete control over this church, and then Ukrainians began bombing and attacking this area, which confirms Russian control over this territory. Today we got additional changes on the ground that were provided us by neutral mappers. The Russians, as we can see, currently control around 15% of the village, and the Russians continue advancing. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction, let's say on the border between the South Donetsk direction and the Dnipropetrovsk direction. The Russians managed to improve their position significantly. As you can see, we have changes on the ground. First of all, let's compare the map between the dates. So this is the situation, let's say by the end of the 19th of June of 2025, and this is approximately the moment when the Russians launched their major offensive operation in this direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Shevchenka and to move further in the northwestern direction towards the settlement of Voskresenka. So this offensive operation started several days ago, and by the end of the 20th of June of 2025, the Russians managed to take under complete control former positions of the armored forces of Ukraine along the anti-tank ditches. So this red line is anti-tank ditches, and the Russians secured this territory. And by the end of the 21st of June, the Russians continued their offensive operation further, as you can see, in the direction of Voskresenka, and the Russians managed to establish control over almost the entire part of the southern part of the village of Shevchenka. As for the village of Shevchenka, this information was confirmed both by pro-Ukrainian resources, and in this map, in this let's say post, we can see the changes that were made according to pro-Ukrainian sources. We see that according to Deep State, the Russians answered the village of Shevchenka from the east, but when talking about real geolocations, they show us completely different picture, and real geolocations tell us and show us that the Russians managed to improve their positions, but mainly in the southern part of the settlement of Shevchenka. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers in this area. We can see lots of episodes how the Russians were trying to take another position and how Ukrainians were attacking them with FPV drones. So during this video, we could see lots of episodes, and several of them were geolocated. For example, one of the strikes took place in this area, another attack took place in the central part, and another attack took place in the southeastern part of the village of Shevchenka. Based on this report, we have adjusted the map and we have colored almost from 5 till 15% of the village of Shevchenka under complete Russian control. So we see that the Russians continue advancing and that the Russians are going to take this village under complete control and in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the village of Zaporizhzhia, where the Russians, according to this map, according to changes, managed to establish complete control over this territory. This information today was confirmed by neutral mappers, by pro-Ukrainian sources, by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, and by several geolocations and videos that were published by the group of Forces East, who has some affiliations with the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, by the Telegram channel, of course. So this is the video we're talking about, this video was published by the Group of Forces East, by the affiliate channels to them, and in this video we can see how exactly the battle for Zaporizhzhia have been taking place. In this video we can see how Russians first were bombing and attacking the settlement. This is something like artillery preparation. After this artillery preparation, the Russians sent hundreds of drones in this area with the purpose to secure this territory, to destroy as many as possible vehicles, machine gun positions, Ukrainian FPV drone positions, probably minefields, many warehouses, ammo depots. So this is the second stage of offensive, when the Russians were securing this territory with FPV drones. And then the Russians began assault operation, and as a result of assault operation, the Russians secured the settlement completely, at least according to this video and according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. During this video we can see two episodes when the Russians raised their flags. So this is the first episode, and according to this episode, according to this scene, it's impossible to geolocate where exactly the Russians raised this flag. Maybe it's possible, but as for the end of the 21st of June, still nobody hasn't managed to geolocate exactly this episode where exactly the Russians raised this flag. And we have another flag, another episode with the Russian flag in the final seconds of this video. This is very important because if we return back to map, because this video, this final episode where the Russian flag was geolocated, and this is exactly the place where the Russian soldiers raised the Russian flag. So exactly this point, as you can see, when talking about changes on the ground according to, let's say, geolocations, we see that the Russians just entered the eastern part of the city of the village of Zaporizhzhia, and it's very difficult to say whether the Russians established complete control over this territory. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 20th of June of 2025. All these territories used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area, and now we have colored this territory based on the video with flags and the report of the Minister of Defense. But I would like to point your attention that we haven't received anything from the western part of the settlement, from the stronghold to the south, so maybe there are still very heavy clashes, maybe there are still pockets of resistance from the Ukrainian side. We don't know for sure. One thing we know for sure is that the Russians continue advancing, and according to different sources who have some affiliations with the Russian Ministry of Defense, the Russians continue offensive operation further in the western direction. And right before we started making this video, we got first reports that the Russians entered the village of Yalta and that there are very heavy clashes right now. This is a very important village because if the Russians establish control with this territory, the Russians will be able to cross the river of Volchya and to move further in the northern direction towards the settlement of Filia. This will allow the Russians even to cut some colder than the Ukrainians, who are still located in these fields. And when talking about these fields, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made number of attacks and attempts to evacuate their soldiers and assets from this territory. The Ukrainians are trying to escape this cauldron. The Russians control this territory with dozens and hundreds of drones, and the Russians don't allow the Ukrainians to quit this cauldron without losses. Every single day, Ukrainians suffer huge losses under the fire and under the pressure of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were trying to escape this cauldron using vehicle, but the vehicle was discovered, and just in this episode we can see that 4 Russian drones were flying above this area. 3 drones attacked this vehicle, and the final drone recorded that Ukrainians lost this vehicle completely and haven't managed to evacuate themselves. So we expect that this pocket is about to collapse and is about to be taken by the Russians completely, and then the Battle of Pavlivka will begin. At the same time, we see a huge number of updates to the northeast of the village of Pavlivka. The Russians enter the final stage of the battle for this settlement as well, because if Ukrainians lose the village of Moravka, then the Russians will be able to continue offensive operation further in the southwestern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Pavlivka from the northeast. So we are about to see another very interesting Russian offensive operation. The Russians are going to attack the settlement of Pavlivka from the northeast. The Russians are going to attack the same settlement through the village of Filia from the southeast, and most likely the Russians will attack the territory of Pavlivka from the east through the village of Goryokhova and through these fields. If Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of the armed forces of Ukraine defense, not in the Pokrovsk direction, but already in the Dnipropetrovsk direction, because the Russians will enter the operational space and everything will be opened for them to move further in the direction of Pavlograd. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation along N32 road, because currently the most interesting updates also are coming from this area. And first of all, I would like to point your attention that the Russians increased their pressure in the direction of the settlement of Novaya Ekonomichne. Currently the Russians are trying to attack this settlement from many directions, mainly from the eastern, northeastern, the southeastern, let's say, parts. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians haven't managed to, let's say, improve their positions. Maybe they managed, but just with the groups of the sabotage and reconnaissance forces. But we see what exactly the Russians are doing, and they're planning to enter the settlement, which will be the beginning of the battle for the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. Another important thing that I would like to point to attention is the Geraint drones. You know that since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians used the Geraint drones just for several purposes. They used them to attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, energy facilities, Patriot systems, air defense systems, warehouses, ammo depots, oil refineries. So the Russians were using Geraint type of drone just to attack deep inside of Ukraine. Logistic, very, very important and strategical, let's say, points and the forces of the armored forces in positions and facilities. Very important and strategical one. And the Russians attacked just these targets because they had limits in these drones. So they didn't have lots of them. They used 150, sometimes 200 drones per day because they had some limitation in production. But starting of 2025, the Russians increased the production rate of this type of drone significantly. And according to information we have, now the Russians are able to use 4 or sometimes even 500 drones per day. And the thing is that currently, due to these numbers of drones the Russians can use, they don't have so many strategical points all over the entire territory of Ukraine to attack. And that is why now the Russians began using this type of weapon, these drones, to attack also the line of combat contact. If you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the Russians just, let's say in 7 kilometers from the line of combat contact, destroyed the Ukrainian bridges in the vicinity of the village of Volodymyrovka with the use of Geraint type drones. So they didn't do this before. So this was something new in the special military operation, and mainly these attacks along the line of combat contact are connected with the situation that the Russians can produce them probably almost several hundreds a day. And now we got another video today that with the bridge took place yesterday. Today we got another video from the area of the village by the name of Yablunovka, and here we can see the same story. Russians used Geraint type of drone to attack Ukrainian positions almost along the line of combat contact. So the Russians, Geraint drones are very powerful. They have very big, let's say, explosive warheads that can deal significant damage, and we can see how the Russians basically were reducing the edge positions of the armored forces of Ukraine to ruins with this type of weapon. So when talking about this video, several geolocations were recorded. For example, in this just let's say place, we can see 3 strikes with Geraint drones. As you can see, 3 strikes that took place along the line of combat contact. Another attack took place in the area of Stepanovka. So the main point is that the Russians currently produce so many Geraint drones that they can use them anywhere. They can attack with drones, even sometimes single stand targets, even if sometimes it's not economically reasonable. So they don't care right now because they have them thousands probably. Another important thing that today several pro-Russian resources updated their maps, and currently several pro-Russian very reliable sources show the area of Kliban-Byk like this way. And according to several pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to secure the village of Alexandra Kalinova completely and to establish complete control over these territories. If this information is correct, and we believe that this information is correct, most likely during the next several hours or during the next day, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. Probably we're going to see some videos with Russian flags, and if once again this information is correct, then the Russians, as a result of their offensive offensive operation managed to establish complete control not just over the village of Alexander Kalinova, but to create a cauldron for the Ukrainians along the Krivoy Toretsk River and the railways between the settlement of Novgorodska and the city of Konstantinovka. We're talking about this territory. Currently, the Ukrainians in this pocket lost any possibilities for evacuation, for supplying support, and any connection with the mainland. Yes, they have some road of 522 road, but this territory is under complete Russian fire control. Ukrainians can't use this road without losses, and this is probably very, very huge cauldron for the Ukrainians and very, very critical situation for them. As for the Chasiv Yar direction, as you can see during the previous 24 hours, we had lots of icons. Most of them are coming from the villages of Bilogor and Alexander Kalinova, Shultine, which means that the Russians probably launched another artillery preparation, and during the next several days we're going to see additional changes on the ground, and we have lots of drone strikes in the vicinity of Mayskaya. Maybe the Russians have some plans for this direction as well. I would like to remind you that the Russians still haven't managed to secure the city of Chasiv Yar, but now we see that most likely they have some plans to move further in the northwestern direction. As for the Sivers direction, we see probably very big activities of Russian artillery forces in the northern part. Maybe the Russians are trying to prepare the Sivers direction before another offensive operation. I would like to remind you that according to information we have currently, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Serebryanka, so we expect that the Russians will send several waves of attacks during the upcoming week. As for the Kupinsk direction, we haven't received anything special. As for the northern directions, we haven't received anything special as well. We see that the front line stabilized completely. As we discussed in the previous videos, most likely the Russians are waiting for the North Koreans, and they're waiting when these North Koreans are going to start building some protections and some engineering fortifications, which will allow the Russians to move further in the southern direction, deep inside of the territory of the Sumy Oblast, according to Zelensky as well. We have covered almost everything about the area of the Special Military Operation Zone. Now let's discuss the latest developments in the Middle East. According to information we have, the United States of America continue reinforcing their positions in this area. They're bringing more and more aircrafts, more and more ships, more and more warehouse missiles, more and more, as much as possible to this area with the purpose to use everything at the same time and to attack the state of Iran from many directions. New satellite imagery from June 19th shows a large number of U.S. Air Force aircraft stationed at Prince Sultan Air Base in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So here we can see lots of aircrafts that most likely the United States of America are going to use in the very near future. Furthermore, a major American airlift operation is taking place right now. At least 10 C-17 military transport planes delivering weapon systems and other equipment from Europe to United States military bases in the Middle East. Another report is that Russians sent something in the direction of probably Lebanon as well. So the Russians are trying to probably improve their positions in this area as well. Furthermore, we got additional reports about the numbers of aircraft and probably air carriers that the United States of America have deployed in this area. We see dozens of aircrafts, maybe even hundreds of aircrafts that are ready to begin bombing and attacking the state of Iran. Furthermore, we got reports that the United States of America continue evacuation of their citizens and probably the embassies from the territory of Iraq, from different states of the Middle East, with the purpose just to be on the safe side. And another important statement we got from the territory of Iran is that the Iranians are not going to accept any ultimatum issued by the Western countries. Key statements of the Iranian Prime Minister during the negotiation in Geneva: Iran refuses to accept the demand of zero uranium enrichment and said it would not negotiate with the US unless Israel stops the war. Also, according to information we have, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran did not shake the hands of the European delegations and did not look them in their eyes while addressing them. So we see that situation is very critical. At the same time, the Israelis continue bombing and attacking the territory of Iran. And the very interesting article we got somewhere from the northern part of Iran, there was a very powerful earthquake, 5.2 magnitude, earthquake recorded in Iran, and some sources reported that maybe that was underground nuke test, the first nuke test of Iran itself. If this information is correct, then most likely a special operation carried out by the United States of America is going to start very, very soon, much sooner than we expect. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.